Welcome to today's episode of Pacific West Mortgage Fund's podcast titled Environmental Reports, What You Need to Know. We'll be breaking down environmental reports, what they are, why they matter, when you need one. This episode is brought to you by the Granger Company, a full-service commercial real estate firm specializing in leasing, sales, and property management throughout Southern and sometimes Northern California. I'm joined today by Steve Corderero of S&S
Commercial Environmental.
Steve and I have worked together for many, many years. We were just talking about this before we started the podcast. Almost 30 years now, Steve. And today we're going to walk through the differences between the Phase 1, Phase 2, Phase 3 environmental reports, and begin by starting, Steve, with what are environmental reports and some of the very basic stuff as to why they're even required. So let's start with some very basic questions, Steve, if we can. Why do you need these reports? What do they do?
To put it very simply, if I can use a little bit of finance jargon.
Please do.
A bank borrows money from the Federal Reserve.
Got it.
Or in your case, you borrow money from people. And those people are expecting their return. So the piece that the bank borrowed, they're going to get a return on their investment. If something goes south with that investment, they lose money. In the case of a bank, which is where primarily these loans got started from with the federal government, is that they don't want to have to take back a property and clean it up and have to put that loan on their books as a non-performing loan.
So, Steve, can I just interrupt you for just a second? So what we're talking about, just take our viewers back or our listeners back a little bit to, let's start with the very basics, because a lot of people aren't really, I get what you're talking about here, that the banks require this to perfect their security in effect. But what I really want to address in this first question, let's start out with the first step in an environmental assessment report is something called a Phase 1 report, right?
Right.
Okay. So let's start out with the very, very basics. What does a Phase 1 do?
Okay, a Phase 1, let's all understand the definition of narrative. Narrative is merely nothing more than an explanation of things. A Phase 1 is a narrative historical of a property from the time it was dirt, all the uses it had over time, be it a regular property, a store, residential apartments, and whether it was a gas station, had a company with underground tanks and chemicals that prior to the time that they were regulated. And it comes to a conclusion from all of the aerial photographs, from the building permits, from the list of 35 different governmental agencies that each Phase 1 depends upon to research further. And we arrive at a conclusion as to whether this property needs further investigation.
Okay, so the critical thing here is that when you're looking, in Southern California, particularly when you're looking at historical reference, we could be talking about like 100-year period, right, for some of these industrial buildings.
Yes, and in fact, the way it basically supposed to go back to 1940 or basically bare dirt agriculture.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so then you go through you do the Phase 1. The next step is what? A Phase 2?
Well, if the property needs a Phase 2. In many cases, the property does not need a Phase 2, so people shouldn't get frightened by that.
So I'll jump in real quick. Just in your experience, what percentage of Phase 1s turn up something?
Maybe a couple of percent, if at all.
Just a minuscule.
But those can be very, very serious for somebody somebody's dependent upon a return on their investment, be it the Federal Reserve or one of your private lenders.
So let's talk about the next thing, which you jumped into right off the bat, is who requires these things? Is this a government program?
Let's go back to Thrift Bill 16. That happened in the 1980s. If you recall,
let me make sure our listeners know what you just said. This is a thrift. This is like a FDIC thing?
Yes, this came from Thrift Bill 16, passed in the late 1980s after the thrifts, savings and loans. Basically, a lot of them failed because they had loaned out large sums of money on property that they had never done an environmental on, and some of these properties ended up with $500,000 cleanups
Or more.
or more.
Some of these cleanups, by the way, and I'm jumping ahead a little bit, they can be huge
Massive.
holes. Yeah.
Yes.
So they pass this thing, they put this in as a requirement for any FDIC insured lender is going to require these.
Yeah, most lender, if they've got to understand due diligence, they'll do it. Just because the due diligence, CERCLA, says that you can maybe get.
You're using an acronym now. I need to know. You're using CERCLA. What is that?
Now, if I can remember that, CERCLA is the Comprehensive Environmental Response. Anyway,
Something like that.
something like that was passed in the late 70s as the United States began to come to terms with the environmental issues.
Okay.
After they determined that dry cleaners had a substance that could kill people over time, and
That's polychloroethylene.
that TCE, PCE, and
Tetrachloroethylene.
tetrachloroethylene, and those not in everybody, but in some people, it will cause cancer down the road.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, one of the things that I didn't have a big issue with because I never understood it was dioxin. Dioxin was the pesticide we used in Vietnam. We called it Agent Orange. I have two brothers, one who got cancer and now has Parkinson's from it, and I have another one that's got mantle cell lymphoma. And that was all because of dioxin, a pesticide that we thought was the greatest thing since chewing gum, and we used it to defoliate the trees and jungles in Vietnam, and ended up killing a lot of our own people.
Yeah. So, Steve, that I think that's the big fear that people have with these chemicals is that, they seem to be just everywhere, back during the Vietnam era. In today's world, I mean, we all have a dry cleaner down the street. So let's follow up some of these questions here that I've got that I know that listeners are going to be interested in. The size of the property really doesn't matter, right? We're not necessarily, you don't need a phase one. People sometimes think, oh, well, I've just got this little tiny retail storefront type thing that I'm looking at buying. That really doesn't need a phase one, does it? And then we find out later that
one of the units in that little shopping center was a former dry cleaner. Didn't take up much space, but because of that, they had cans of PCE that stood in the alley behind the store. They basically went out there and got buckets of this material and put it into the dry cleaning machine, spilling it on the concrete or asphalt floor. And what happened was it went right through the floor, right through the dirt, and headed towards groundwater because it's a heavy material.
So so this really is something, if you're dealing with almost any commercial property, what does a phase one do for you? If you get a clean phase one, is there some legal, does that get you off the hook, or what does that do for you?
I wouldn't say it gets you off the hook, but, and I'm not a lawyer, please, I'm not a lawyer, but it basically gives you fulfill the due diligence requirement that allows you to try to say, no, it's not my problem down the road.
Right. So it's basically, let's use a term, a layman's term here, a get out of free jail card. It allows you to argue that, hey, I bought this in good faith. I'm not part of the chain of title that's on the hook to clean this stuff up. That's really what
That's really what they're trying to do with it, yes.
Okay. All right. So let's cover, we covered briefly the phase one. Next comes the phase two.
Yes.
And what's involved with that?
Well, let's just give an example. Supposing that I come to a property and the property looks so clean and pristine, and I go to the electrical box, because it's now an office. I go to the electrical box and I see inside the pump, the dry cleaner, these were all circuits for those, and I go, gee, that says dry cleaning machine, and it's an office. Well, I know that in the history, there had been a dry cleaning machine there. And there may or may not be permitted depending upon the county and depending upon the age. So I say, well, we should do a phase two. And the phase two, basically, we're going to be looking for soil contamination and really nowadays soil vapor contamination.
So talk about that vapor. I know that's something that's new within the last couple of years, these vapor studies. What are those and how do they work?
Well, basically, a soil vapor study, what happens is TCE, PCE, they're very heavy. They drop quickly through the soil.
Now, just to interrupt you. So let's say that you have a concrete floor. They go right through
They go right through, because concrete's actually very porous. So is asphalt.
And they just, boom.
They go right through. They get into the soil. Now, it's a heavy material, so it goes through the soil. But there's what they call remnants. So around 2010, the federal government came up with these regional screening levels, which were followed up by the states, especially here in California, which always likes to one-up the federal government. And pretty much they came up with a standard that if you are in a property that has got a problem, if 1 millionth person could die after 25 years sitting in the same room, you've got an issue. You've got to clean it up.
So I understand now, I'm backing up just for a second. So before we jump right into phase twos, but now I understand now phase ones now require a vapor study as part of the phase one?
No. A phase one is only going to recommend.
I see.
Okay, a phase one is strictly historical. It's a historical narrative, an explanation of what was on the property, what was around the property, and whether or not there could be a potential issue.
Okay. And now we're jumping, you suspect, hey, we found something, that looks like there was an underground storage tank here 40 years ago, and you're recommending a phase two.
Right.
And that implies the first, one part of that would be the vapor analysis.
Right.
What else would you be doing?
That's pretty much it. You're going to go and you're going to look at the property. You're going to, by that time, you should have already gotten air quality management permits that will show what might have been there years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And you're going to basically poke 7 holes in the ground. You're going to go down to 5, 10, 15 feet, depending upon, what the property looks like, what the geology is like. And you're going to get the results of those vapor samples. You're going to poke the ground. You're going to collect a few samples of soil. And then you're going to put in what they call a vapor well. A vapor well is basically a plastic tube, a lot like you'd see in an aquarium, but it's placed into the ground, it's cut, as holes are put in it, and it's put down to whatever depth you want. And then it has to sit there, and it's done all according to regulation. It's got to be packed properly. So you let it sit there for a minimum of 2 hours. And what that does is it allows the vapor in the soil to equilibrate, become equal, and it gets into the little tube. And then after 2 hours, you bring along your next guy, the vapor collection technician, and he pulls vapor off of that tube at a certain rate specified in the regulations.
Okay.
Now you take that sample, you take it to the lab, and the lab's got its own system. You got to have it there within 4 hours, unless it's in a certain container. Okay, then they do their own test. And from that, they find out whether or not it meets the regulatory guidelines.
Okay. So in the old days, I was always familiar with the phase two always tended to require some corings. Like you would go down.
Yes.
So it wasn't just sampling the vapor, but you were actually drilling holes into the ground to 5, 10, 15, whatever it was, trying to get an idea of the extent of the contamination, if there was any.
Well, it's not so much the extent of the contamination, Mark. It's more of the geology of the soil.
Okay.
Are you in a site that they dumped in soil, they did backfill, dug it out, compacted it down? Are you in a space where you've got maybe down 10 feet, as an example of a job I'm doing in West LA, where a former river went through the property? So you have at 10 feet, you've got this really hard bedrock. And while the PCE went through the bedrock and down further to water, you still have to, you basically need to note all this stuff. So when you give your report to the regulator and ask for them to work with you to, quote, close the property, to meet the regulatory guidelines, that you've done the proper job.
Okay.
And part of that is the geology. That's why I said you're absolutely right. When you go down, you're taking soil samples, and you're taking them, and you're testing some of them. If you're doing 7 holes in the same basic area, you're not going to need to test all of the soil, but you're going to need to test representative soil so that you can get the geology of what that soil is actually composed of.
Great. And when they take these soil samples in the phase 2 or the vapor extraction samples, they send them to a special lab. And the device they use, I think, is called a spectrometer. Is that right?
I'm not exactly sure.
Gas spectrometer. But they analyze what's in the soil and the extent of the contamination.
And normally you won't find much in the soil. Again, it goes right through the soil. It's the remnants. Those are the vapor remnants that are left over.
What about things like gasoline?
Gasoline, the biggest issue with gasoline is it has benzene. So the whole issue here is the VOCs, the volatile organic compounds. And they're the ones, halogenated, I don't remember the top of my head, but anyway, they're the ones that will kill people down the road.
Mm-hmm. So we have to be concerned about the vapors actually emanating out of the ground and affecting the health of the people
if a person is sitting in one spot for a long time.
Yeah.
Now, there's different standards for residential versus commercial. You don't expect that a commercial person is going to be sitting in one place for 15 years.
This is a topic I want to ask you about in just a second. So in terms of residential being something to consider, but let me just jump forward again on this. Now, phase 1, phase 2, you find out that, yeah, I've got something in here and these are the numbers and they're over. I guess there's some guidelines by the government in terms of how much of these chemicals you can have in the ground.
Yes.
Or in the vapor extraction or whatever test you're doing. So then that leads us to a phase 3. A phase 3 is what? Remediation? Is that what that usually?
Phase 3, it can be done, basically dig it out and get rid of it.
So when you say dig it out, let's say that I bought a property and I find out, oh my gosh, it had a gas station on it, 45 years ago, and nobody even remembers this thing. And we do the phase 2 and we get some hits on gasoline, hydrocarbons, heavy metals or whatever, and there's some benzene in there. So in that circumstance, we're going to be digging soil out.
If the gas tanks are still there, you're going to have to take them out legally. If they're not there, you're going to probably go through 2 or 3 phase 2s to define or characterize the area. And once you've characterized the area, you're going to know how much you have to take out. Now, then you've got to get permits because there's going to be vapor that escapes to the air, and there's people in the area, and you know how regulators are. So you've got to do everything according to the regulation. And then once you're done digging out what you think is enough, now you're going to take core samples on the sites. Because we're talking about, when you take a gas station, talking about something like old gasoline, old diesel, things that you can actually see, put your hands on. And then you're going to take core samples on the sides of the excavation, confirmation sampling they call it.
And that's just to determine that you've actually, it's almost like a tooth cavity. You're taking out the rotten part of the tooth, you get to the clean tooth, and then you backfill it. Is that sort of the analogy?
That's it.
Okay. I got a couple of questions. The
thing that I was telling you, chlorinated hydrocarbons, that's what they're worried about. That's the PCE and the TCE.
Okay. So we've talked a little bit on these podcasts about polychloroethylene, PCE. Is just the greatest cleaning solvent known to man.
Let me tell you, we cleaned our teeth with it. We cleaned our guns with it. We cleaned our clothes with it. We cleaned our bombs with it. It was great stuff. They washed their hands in it. The PCBs, that was also. PCBs were the same way.
One thing that's fascinating about this conversation, Steve, is, I've been around long enough. I remember my first tank removal cleanup, and the fire department came out. And this was in like 1985, and they went down there, they opened up the tank, they saw a little residual gasoline in there, so they took the residual gasoline out and just poured it in the soil, and then they put that dry ice into the thing and then trucked the tank away. But Nowadays the tolerance for these chemicals is so much lower. I think people are starting. Just you mentioned the ballast in these lights. I just recycled some ballast, and I had to go to a special place because there's a minute amount of mercury in those things, and they can't just put them in a landfill anymore.
Right, mercury and PCB in the older ones.
Yeah. So these tolerances keep getting lower and lower. I remember when I first started, as I mentioned to you, that example of the tank, but they used to measure these chemicals in parts per million. Now they're down in the parts per billion.
One drop of PCE in a pool, 50-yard pool, will give you
will exceed the limit.
Yeah, will actually be your limit, yes.
So just the smallest. So listeners, if you can imagine a standard backyard swimming pool, and you're dropping just less than a thimble of PCE in that swimming pool, will put you over the limit.
It's going to dilute throughout, and yes, put you over the limit.
Isn't that amazing?
It's
wow.
crazy.
And you wonder, I always am asked this question about these environmental reports, and the fact is that the LA basin is just chock full of these sites.
LA, Orange County, San Diego, Ventura. I mean, we actually live in a pretty, it goes back to the 1800s in a lot of places.
I was just visiting a family member up in the gold country, and all those creeks up there are contaminated with mercury up there, and arsenic, which was used to separate the gold, and they still just flows in those rivers.
And you'll find a lot of arsenic around old railroad tracks because that was the greatest pesticide in the world.
Really interesting, huh? Okay, so you need one of these things if you're touching anything that's even any commercial property, certainly, right?
Well, let's say for the cost of it versus the size of the loan or what you're paying for the property, it's peanuts, really, and it's well worth it.
Yeah, right. It gives you kind of a it certainly puts you in a position where you know what's going on. Whether or not you go forward with the project or not is a different question. But if you buy into something and you didn't do one of these, and now you're on the chain of title, you're on the hook, right?
It's also if you do it and you're paying for it, and you find that you actually find something. Well, now you may want to reduce the price.
To cover the cleanup.
To even cover the phase 2.
Yeah.
And then if there is cleanup, you may want all the money back.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 is the actual remediation. What are some of the costs of these things? What's a phase 1 go for generally?
About $2,500.
And time-wise to do one?
It can be, depending upon the property and who's doing it, it can be a week, 2 weeks.
But generally, certainly under 3 weeks.
Yes.
Okay. Phase 2, that depends a lot on what you're doing.
It all depends upon what you're doing and whether you have to come back and do a secondary phase 2.
Got it.
And maybe a tertiary or a third phase 2.
Right. But generally speaking, on the vast majority of these things, what is that? More than $20,000? Less than $20,000?
I really couldn't tell you, but initial one maybe $10,000 to $15,000.
Just to be, you got to drill some soil.
You got to because you're hiring a geologist, you're hiring a driller, you're basically hiring somebody to do the testing. You're collecting all this stuff, taking it to a laboratory, and a general contractor, a general engineering contractor like myself, not going to do it for free.
Yeah, sure, of course, and
because I'm carrying the liability in the end.
Yeah.
Something goes wrong, they're coming after me.
So when you do this phase 1, that's a question I didn't ask and I should have. When you do the phase 1, what do you get like a book of like a history book of the property, and it shows all the pictures and the permits, and I mean that's what you're producing.
That's what I'm producing. I'm producing pretty much a 20 or 30 page narrative. A lot of that is stock, but it's all the little pieces. That's why something like a phase 1, a lot of the work that I do could be automated, but it takes being able to look at that work and come to a conclusion.
Because you've literally, over the years now, looked at thousands of these sites.
Right.
All over.
And I've done phase 2s, I've done phase 3s.
And you know all the different agencies and what things are, for example, I was recently did a loan with Pacific West on a property in where was it? Out in Monrovia in the San Gabriel Valley, and that San Gabriel River Valley is a Superfund site. That whole area out there, and I never realized that. But so let's say that everything around you is a problem, and now you've got a problem. My understanding is that if you're not a source, then you're not really a...
Correct. What the state of California did was they had a well investigation program because the San Gabriel River, there were so many sources of contamination and contributed to the vast. They've got several different basins. Each one is separate, and so you've got a separate title name for each project. But what they did was they sent out a questionnaire to anybody who had used any chemicals or the name of the company looked like they could have used chemicals, and made them fill out this questionnaire. So what you're looking for in that case, it's like down to 16 potential responsible parties, and they looked at and they became responsible parties. So they're basically paying for the cleanup, but everybody else who could have been, might have been, after they filled out their paperwork, after they reviewed the paperwork, they let most of them off with a clearance letter.
Right.
But you really want to have that letter in your phase one so that potentially they can't come back to you.
Or if you want to refinance the property, if you're going to sell the property, people get wind that this area's got problems, you can produce this report and say, hey, you know what, we got a clean bill of health. I wanted to ask you, after you do the phase one, after you remediate it, after you clean out all the dirty soil, the magic ticket is what? The no further action letter?
No further action letter, which says at the bottom, but if anything comes up, we can still come after you. But basically, it's a no further action letter written by a regulator that says you've complied with everything we've asked of you, and we've reviewed your reports, and basically we concur with your reports. I just did one in Texas, and that's what they call it, their concurrence. So we concur with your reports, and therefore, here's a letter that says you don't have to do any more work.
I see. So it's not a completely off-the-hook letter because, as you say, they can always revisit it if something comes up. But what they're saying is we're not going to be focusing on your property. We're not expecting you to do any more work.
And in just about probably 99% of the cases, they'll never will come back.
Yeah. Or maybe even more than that.
It's not even worth it to them.
Yeah. Because you've gotten rid of the material that you want to do. So let's say that, for example, and I just ran into this. This is fresh off the press, as they say. We were presented a loan a couple of weeks ago. A gentleman had a piece of property, had a restaurant on it, and the broker said, well, he owns this free and clear. He wants to take some money out. And we said, great. It's a corner, however. It's a corner piece of property in a good location. Boy, it sure looked like, a gas station from 40 years ago. So I said, send me over the phase one and phase two, or if they have one. If they don't have one, then we'll have to do one. Sure enough, he'd done a phase two. Sure enough, it had 5 tanks that were removed. He had not completed the investigation. I think this owner had either inherited the property or had purchased it without doing the phase, the environmental assessment work. So he's really kind of stuck now. What do you do in that circumstance if you're an owner? You bought this property, maybe your great uncle left it to you and you think you're sitting on a fortune, and now you find out, wow, I've got this problem. What do you do in that circumstance?
You basically have to complete the investigation. You really don't have any choice, especially if there were permits and it was regulated when they started the process. And let's say Uncle Harry died in the middle of it. You've got to finish what he started because it's not going to go off of anybody's list. Once it's on a list, once it's at some agency, it's not going away.
It's there.
It's there. And it's going to show up on my list of 35 different agencies that I look at.
So the water board, we're the ones I always seem to run into are Department of Toxic Substance Control. That's a state agency.
Yeah, that's DTSC.
DTSC.
And they basically they are over everybody.
They are like the supreme commander.
Correct.
And then you've got the local water boards.
and they're under the Regional Water Quality Board.
Is that a county agency?
No,
or?
that's also a state agency, the Department of Water Resources.
Okay.
And they're basically all work together with DTSC, and they have like 9 different local agencies, Regional Water Quality Boards.
I'm going to tell you a funny story about. I had a client that he just got wound up over this stuff. And I'm sure you know the property, which I won't name, but he was so angry at these local, because these folks have a lot of power. I mean, they can just tell you how things are going to be. And this was not a person that liked to be told what to do. So he said, you know what, screw you. I'm going up and talking to your boss up in Sacramento. He shows up at the meeting, and the guy that he'd been arguing with locally had been flown up to Sacramento. And he was in the meeting talking to the guy's boss, and they were basically like, well, you know what? You got a problem. You got to clean it up. And this leads me to the next thing, which is these agencies are very powerful. They never go away. And if you are on the chain of title and contributed to the problem or bought it without doing one of these reports, you're now on part of the cleanup program.
Right.
You didn't necessarily sign up for it, but that's what you're...
And they're going to come after you. As they're going to see you as a potentially responsible party. And once they figured out that you have ownership, they're going to call you a responsible party.
So I've always told clients that that's the main reason to have one of these reports, because you can go into that meeting and say, hey, I got a licensed engineer to tell me this property, and for whatever reason, they either missed something or it wasn't in the reports, the agencies didn't put it in the reports, whatever. But I'm not a responsible party here. I'm off the hook. And you may lose money because you invested in the property or something, but you're not, because these cleanups, Steve, we've seen this where these cleanups, you got a small piece of property and all of a sudden the cleanup's $1 million.
I'm actually working on one of those right now in West LA, and it was a dry cleaner that went on for 60 years.
Oh boy.
And there's contamination. We found it in the soil. We found it in the big time in the vapor. And then we found it in the groundwater. We're not even, the beauty of working with somebody like myself, S&S Commercial Environmental Services, Inc., is that I couldn't resist that.
No, you got the plug.
Okay.
You got the
Okay,
airwave.
I got the plug. Okay. Is that we can go in and we can do a lot of the work that the agency will have you do before you take it to the agency. So we've had a vapor extraction machine going for 1.5 years now. We're working on the permitting because we did it as a pilot test to start with. And so now we're waiting for the agency to give us a permit. But meanwhile, we're getting a lot of the contamination out of the soil. Then once I get that permit, then I will go to probably to the LA County Fire Department Hazardous Mitigation Unit and get them to oversight going down to the groundwater.
So basically, I think just to summarize that, what you're doing is doing a lot of before you get too far in with the agencies, what you're doing
before you get in with the agency at all. Because here's what happens when you get to the agency. When you go to the agency, well, you give them, let's say to begin with, well, here's the results of the tests we did. What do you want us to do? They send you a letter and says, we reviewed the results of your investigations. Now propose to us in a work plan what you intend to do. And then they review that. Okay, now you're talking months down the road. And then they come back and they approve it or disapprove it or tell you that, well, maybe we'd like to see a few more samples. Again, so by doing a lot of the work up front, you're going to save a whole lot of time and money.
So that's really the key, is to try and get a jump on it.
In fact, Mark is one of the smartest people I know.
Oh, yes,
regarding
I like that.
Seriously,
keep that up, Steve.
I did a job with him years ago, which he brought me into. And this turned out to be like a $600,000 job. And we had to clean up this 13-acre site. And we did a lot of the work before we went to the agency, so that when we got to the agency, we were able to. It still took another year, 1.5 years, but we were able to complete it. It would have taken 5 years otherwise.
Yeah, so I have found that first off, I think that, I don't want anybody to think that you're going to mislead or trick these agencies. They've seen everything. And I think the point here is that a lot of times some of the low-hanging fruit on the remediation is what we're talking about. You can get rid of a lot of the really easy stuff quickly and without having to create too much, I don't know, what would you say, paperwork or...
Well, the whole concept is you're going to have your own internal proposal. You're going to do it according to your proposal. That proposal's got to fit what the agency is going to review and act on later. But
Right.
You're doing it, you know what they want, you're doing everything the way they would want it, but you're doing it without their oversight because it's not necessary to start. A contractor can actually close a site, but I don't know what bank's going to accept
Right,
a contractor's
exactly.
signature, okay? So you're doing everything you can, and you're doing it all correctly, and then you're giving this report to the agency and saying, we brought it this far, what do we need to get it over the goal line?
So, Steve, I know one way to close these sites, and I want you to talk a little bit about this, is what's called a health and safety review or study or something. And this is basically, we just had a property that we had one of these done on. We know there's hydrocarbons in the soil. We have an indemnification from a major corporation. They're letting because oil and a lot of these hydrocarbons just break down over time naturally. So one of the things that the agencies are concerned about is, hey, if I'm working in this industrial building, am I exposing my employees to, bad air, just to simplify it. And they do what's called a health and safety study.
Human Health Risk Assessment.
That's
an
what it's called.
HHRA. And we use that very
Okay,
effectively.
say that again slowly.
HHRA, Human Health Risk Assessment.
Okay.
Okay, we use this very effectively to not have to do additional work and or close the site. Okay, because what the Human Health Risk Assessor is going to do, and we use a PhD that's very experienced at this, is we give her all our numbers. And she takes these numbers, she runs it through the DTSC and the EPA formulas, and she says that if this is a commercial property and people are not going to be working there more than 8 hours a day for over 2 years, then it's not going to reach a level that's going to be of harm to those people. If it's a residential property, well, your numbers show that it falls within or without the federal and state guidelines.
Great.
Okay, and with that, you can now get a loan from the bank because you've proven that it's not a hazard. To give you an example of one job I just did in Vernon, we went in and we figured out that I figured just because of the way that the paperwork looked, the responses, the questions that were in the actual log at the city of Vernon, that they've been playing some games. So I said, let's do a phase 2. Well, we did a phase 2, and what we were looking for was to see if there was anything in the soil or if there's any soil vapor. We ended up finding out that there was a big, huge 10-foot deep by probably 20-foot wide clump of degraded diesel. So instead of taking that any further, before we took it any further, I took the numbers to the risk assessor, and she ran the numbers, and she basically cleared the property, and in this clearance said that there's not going to be an issue for workers on that property in what the government considers the occupancy, the occupancy that a worker would have with that property.
Got it. Okay, so this is a great segue into my next question, which is, okay, you're buying an apartment building, or you're buying a single-family residence. Do you need a report for one of those?
It depends upon where it's at.
Well, tell me why you would need one. Like, let's say you're buying where would you need to buy? Where would you need to do? What part of the city would you need to buy to get a phase 1 report on an apartment building if you were going to do one?
Well, if your property was next to a dry cleaner, if your property was next to an old gas station, if that gas station or that dry cleaner had a problem and it hadn't been completely characterized or cleaned up, the city might even ask for it. Because the
Interesting.
city's going to be responsible in the end for any permits that they issue.
So, Steve, here's the question I'm also often asked is especially when we're doing loans in Pacific West, and you say, well, tell me about the property. The guy tells you about the property, and you say, did you ever do a phase one on it? And they say, no, I don't need to do a phase one. The property's spotless. I used it. So oftentimes, like, let's say you are buying an apartment building and you don't know what's around it. I mean, it's time has passed, and if you're buying in places like, well, lots of parts of the city of LA have been occupied for 150 years. So how would you know? Well, let me ask you a question a different way. Would it make sense to get a phase one if you're buying an apartment building just to find out what's in the neighborhood?
Let me ask you a question, Mark. When you do something in life that could harm you, do you get insurance?
Yes.
Well, a phase one in many ways is a form of insurance. It's called a disclosure of what might have been or what is. And especially in the city of LA, you've got sandborne maps that will go back to the 1800s, and it'll show right on it there was a dry cleaner.
So tell me, you use the term sandborne maps. What is that?
Sandborne fire insurance maps. Prior to the 1950s, Sanborn had a group of engineers.
Hold on. Sanborn is an insurance company?
No, Sanborn was a data. It was basically, they were an insurance, what do you call it? When an insurance company is looking out for themselves.
Like due diligence.
They would go out and they would map cities, all right, wherever there was occupancies going on. And they had their whole scale of how a building was built, what was in and around the building. And, there were tables and everything else. Mm-hmm. And so these engineers would go out and they would do it every few years, and they would map out what was there. And then they would come back and they would put out these Sanborn fire insurance maps.
Interesting.
And the insurance
I've never heard of those.
And the insurance companies would use those to basically rate the property. What kind of value, what kind of insurance do you need? All right. Well, a lot of those you will find dry cleaners. You will find gas stations. Oil and gas, they called it.
What about another big one that we hear all about now is like oil sumps from from back in the day, or abandoned oil wells. Are those things?
Okay. Okay. Think about an oil well, right? And the oil well is not an issue until it is actually not used anymore. Mm-hmm. Okay. Then it becomes an abandoned oil well. And yes, you do have a sump that's under.
Or just sometimes there's one.
But again, oil it's by itself is not an issue, really. In most cases, it's when the oil is refined, when you get the chlorinated hydrocarbons, which they cracked around the beginning of the last century,
right.
Which they turned into PCE, TCE, and a variety of other chemicals.
Yeah, xylene, and benzene, and all these other.
And they work great.
Yeah.
In fact, TCE was used as an anesthetic back in the 30s. Did you know that?
No, I did not know that, Steve. I'm always learning. That's interesting. Well, I know that, in Europe, a lot of, I'm trying to think of the chemical, maybe it's PCBs, now are considered relatively harmless as long as you don't come into direct contact with them. They're, as long as they're buried, whatever it is, 10 feet under dirt or something, they don't worry about it too much.
I'm not too sure about it.
Yeah.
I don't know much about that.
Yeah. Okay. So Steve, let's see. What else can I ask you? You've covered the phase ones, phase twos, phase threes. Low percentage chance of anything happening, but it's an insurance policy.
Insurance policy,
as you say. If you have a property and you're on title and you didn't do one of these things, the only reason to do it would be that if you're going to try and sell it or if you're going to try and finance it. Because if you don't have one of these reports, from what I'm hearing, it's pretty much means you're not liquid anymore. The property you're stuck with it.
Well, you're stuck with it. You might be stuck with it anyway, but at least maybe you can find some money from one of the state agencies to help you clean it up.
Yeah. I know they do that with gas stations, right? I
Right.
mean, they have like a gas remediation
Right.
program.
Yeah,
What about dry cleaners? Do they have anything like that for dry cleaners?
They really don't have much like that for dry cleaners.
That's kind of a surprise, isn't it? I mean, they're just as bad really as gas stations.
Actually, they're a lot worse.
I wonder why that is.
Gas stations contaminate the soil and the area around it, and in the case, there's a lot of cases where the benzene and oil and gas will go, or the gas itself will go down 50 feet, depending upon the geology of the soil. But I've never seen one for dry cleaners.
Interesting. One thing I want to tell our listeners here is that when you start looking at these reports and water movement and stuff, all of these, there's a whole life underground. You've got underground rivers, you've got aquifers. This water is moving everywhere. Anything that's in it is transported. I mean, maybe I'm speaking out of turn here, but I've just assumed that everything in the basin, the first stage aquifer, is basically contaminated.
You want to tell them what an aquifer really is?
So an aquifer is like an underground lake, right?
Yeah, except it's full of rocks. What they're doing is getting the water to come together.
Right. So but this stuff is flowing. I mean, not stuff. This water is flowing.
The water's moving based upon the whatever direction.
And the aquifers rise and lower depending on how much water's in the soil.
Well, depending upon the rainfall, too. Some of these aquifers have gone down. The first ones, it can go down 20 feet.
Yeah. It is interesting that also the thing about these aquifers is the water table in different areas is different depths. So, for example, you may have been a contributor, just take a gas station, and you're in an area where the water table is 120 feet, and so you never really impacted the water. Whereas in different parts of the city, the water table may only be 15 feet.
Then you have to explain to them perched groundwater. Perched groundwater is where the water up above, you're watering your lawn, you're doing irrigation,
sure.
And it goes down to a hard layer, and it pools. That gets contaminated, and all of a sudden, you have a perched water contamination issue, and you have to clean it up. And it may be a large pond, and the actual groundwater that they're pulling the drinking water from may be down 1,000 feet. But because you've got something at 20 or 30 feet and you've got a hard layer, that becomes perched groundwater. And the whole concept is that in the end, if we lost everything and we had to basically drill down to that 20 or 30 feet and use that water to drink from, that it would be clean.
So that's almost impossible, though. Some of this water,
but
I mean, if you're talking, hold on a second. Hold on before you say that. If you have your thimble full of contaminant in a pool, how do you ever get all this stuff out of the groundwater? I mean, it'd take you for 1,000 years to do it.
No, not really. If you can pump and treat, and eventually you'll get rid of, you bring it up to the level, and then it's going to attenuate naturally. Nature, we here are, as humans, we live what? We got a 70-year life, and so...
Well, speak for yourself, Steve.
70-year life. Let's just take 70 years, okay? And in that 70 years, and actually out of that, we may only have 40 where we're actually active. In that 40 years, we're trying to do what nature's going to do in 200 years. That's kind of the way I look at it. That's the whole thing.
So from my analogy of 150 years of contamination in LA, a lot of this stuff has just naturally disappeared.
And you will find a lot of degraded oil, degraded gas, degraded soil. You'll find a lot of degraded things. But again, they still can be an issue. But when they're degraded, their levels can be a lot higher.
So when they, we just talked about I saw a lot on the news recently about the fires up in the Palisades and the Eaton fire, that tragedy, and they took a lot of that material and they, scraped the lots, and then they took the material to a transportation center. I don't know where these things were, but where does that stuff go after that?
They took it to Simi Valley and dumped it in one of, what's the big Waste Management has a facility up there. Now, the issue with a lot of that is this. When you have a fire and you have a lot of PVC and other materials.
Plastics.
These were old homes. you end up with some dioxin that people aren't really looking for, and you end up with a few other metals and
heavy metals of some sort.
Toxic chemicals that are bad for you, and they're not really testing for them. And so that fire probably produced a lot of dioxin. I'm real familiar with dioxin, as I said when I started out.
Right.
And it can be bad for some people.
Mm-hmm. So this stuff goes in a landfill. There was what was the landfill that was up in Central California?
Kettleman Hills.
Kettleman Hills. Is that still open?
Kettleman Hills, I believe it's still open.
And some of the material gets trucked there?
Yeah, yes. I believe most of this material from the Palisades and from Altadena and Malibu, part of it, it all went to waste management. And that whole program, what they were doing was they were basically just taking off the top foot or so of dirt, leaving all the rest of the debris.
Do you think there's still stuff in that soil?
Yeah, a good recommendation would be that after everybody thinks they've got everything done, would be to hire somebody like S&S Commercial Environmental Services to come back and do a sampling program at the surface and down at 2 feet, and have them tested for the range of chemicals and materials that would be result from a fire.
So you think
you
think that would be a good course of action if you're, say, rebuilding or buying one of those lots?
Yes, and they even talked about it. But that whole program it's got so much governmental.
Well, there's a lot going on there, and that's really today's topic is really not so much about those particular sites, although you got a lot of commercial buildings that have to go back, and a lot of commercial buildings have to get funding because insurance is not going to cover it. Yeah, exactly, and I think that's where this conversation today, Steve, is probably very, timely, which is that a lot of, if you're getting into one of these situations, you want to go in with your eyes wide open, right? I mean, you definitely want to make sure that you're understanding what you're getting involved with.
What you don't want is an employee, and you're talking business because that's where your bulk of your money is. You don't want an employee to have any reason to come back and say, I got cancer. I'll give you an example. Years ago, I was in the asbestos abatement business. And this person that I worked for, and he essentially hired some people that he thought he would give a chance to off of one of these programs. And they went down in these tunnels, and they removed the asbestos. Everything was supposedly clean. And then what they did was they came out and said, oh, there's a little bit of asbestos there. My lungs are permanently affected. Okay, I've got lung issues for the rest of my life. And the contractors' workman's comp went up 400%.
Yeah, that's a problem for sure. That brings up asbestos. Asbestos is everywhere. I recently changed an HVAC duct in my house. It was wrapped in, my house was built in 1963. It was wrapped in asbestos. They had the guys in the hazmat suits come out. I mean, it's a big deal to remove that stuff now. And that's everywhere, isn't it?
Well, it's in most homes that were built before 1980.
Really? So if you bought a house prior to 1980, you almost certainly have asbestos in it.
Asbestos was used as an insulator and as a binder. Okay. What it would do, the paper wrap is probably what was on, corrugated paper wrap is probably what was on your ducts. Okay. And it was used as a binder to bring the other materials together, to hold them. Now, it was used in acoustical spray. You notice that after 1980, acoustical spray is very thin, okay?
So now what we're talking about is cottage cheese ceilings, is that right?
So you got thicker or you got thinner. Now, the thin stuff is usually after 1980. Before 1980, they used asbestos for two reasons. It was a good binder. It clumped everything together. It all stuck onto it, okay, held it together. And asbestos being the minute rock it was, it went through the guns, the spray guns, the application guns, and it kept them going. Because when you've got 4 or 5 guys and they're working and their gun clogs, you can lose 4 or 5 or 6 or 10 to 12 man hours
just cleaning the equipment.
Just cleaning the equipment out. So asbestos worked well as a lubricant.
Isn't that interesting? That's amazing. So The asbestos, my understanding is asbestos is not a big deal unless it becomes what they call friable, so it gets in the air, right?
So you put it together, for example, in your big blocks of insulation that went around these big heating pipes in the commercial buildings.
Right, or ships.
Ships, however. What happened was while asbestos is a fantastic, almost indestructible rock, everything that it's binding together falls apart. So now the asbestos is coming out into the air. It's becoming airborne, as they call it.
Mm-hmm.
And now, once it's airborne, it's what they call cross-contaminating other places as the air moves it around.
And
Okay?
that's why when they're removing it, say, from a building, that's why it's such a hazardous point.
Well, that's why they have to put up plastic, completely seal off the area. Everybody goes in there wearing masks. They go through a special couple of chambers, and then they have your exhaust fans going through HEPA filters, sucking the air out of the space. And it's all done with double layer plastic. And when you're all done taking down the asbestos, we're talking about big fireproofing on commercial buildings, and you're putting it into bags. Now these bags, they go and they get disposed of. They're all going to be labeled properly. Then you're going to wrap the plastic in, and you're eventually going to end up with a very clean space.
So, Steve, let me ask you, since we're segueing a little bit into just households and residential properties, other than asbestos, is there anything else that you run into in those settings that are something to be concerned about?
Buildings before 1980 may also have lead paint.
That's right.
They may also have lead in the plumbing fixtures. There's a whole program for that. They've been working on that for years to try to identify lead in water, because in the morning, let's say you get up in the early morning, you're tired, you turn on the faucet, you get that first glass, and you just drink it. Well, the lead could be there going into you. Now, what's terrible about lead, not only is it toxic and can cause cancer, but it makes people, it lowers their IQs because it gets into the brain.
Yeah. Yeah, I know lead right now, I think, that from what I've heard, is particularly if you're in a setting where children are around, there's zero tolerance for it, right? I mean,
exactly.
there's no allowable limit of lead. So, for example, let me just interrupt you for just a second, because I got a quick question on this. Lead paint in an apartment building. What do you do in that circumstance? Let's say you bought an apartment building, 1920, the thing's loaded with lead paint. You can, you do samples and stuff. Do you have to take that all out, or what do you do?
Basically, it's going to be your choice. You either take it all out or you seal it properly.
Seal it. And that means what? Painting over it?
Pretty much painting over it. It would be a real simple term.
Okay.
And you do the same thing with asbestos. You encapsulate it, or you take it out. Encapsulate it for the short term, take it out. Let's say, for example, the Arco Towers downtown. What they did was, as different units, the leases changed, before the next person would go in, they would isolate that suite. They would move the asbestos, redo the fireproofing, and then rent it to the new
there
people.
was fireproofing around the steel.
Fireproofing all up and down the Arco Towers.
Really? And that all had to be removed?
All had to be removed.
And they just did that section by section. It took years to do, but
Yes.
That's how they removed it, huh? Wow, that's interesting. I never knew that. Huh. Well, if it's not one thing, it's another for building owners.
And the other thing is mold.
Mold. I'm glad you brought that up, because that is also a hot topic right now.
Mold can be an issue that will cause some people to get sick. Okay? Not so much with Legionnaire's disease, but basically it's not good for some people if they have a propensity, as my brothers had, to dioxin. Okay? They can get an illness from it.
So
get pneumonia, and there's a whole bunch of different things it can have.
So, as property managers, we get the call occasionally, I just had a toilet overflow or a sink stopped up or something, and there's water, and now it's into the, it's into the walls or whatever. But you got to jump on that right away, don't you?
You do. And I have another company which my son runs. I got to do a plug here. Rusto Bros, which does after fire and after plumbing leaks.
And they come in and
They
treat
come
that
in,
stuff.
right? Because the insurance company's got it all. They've got it all laid out, what they'll pay for, what they won't pay for.
Right.
And you come in and you basically set up a containment, and then you put your air machines in, and you draw out and you dry it out.
Perfect. Well, Steve, great insights. I want to thank you for coming down today and going through this. Steve Corderero, S&S Commercial Environmental
Services
Inc. They are the guys to go to. We've used them for 30 plus years. They're on our website if you want some information on Steve, on how to get Steve. We've relied on him, as I say, for decades. Steve, I can't thank you enough for coming out.
Well,
I appreciate you talking. We're probably going to have you back if you don't mind dragging. We'll drag you back out here.
I would just like to give a plug for Mark. I've known Mark for a lot of years. I've always found him to be very honest, and he has actually helped me get information to clear or close sites and not cause the person who, just to give you an example, we were working on a site in Carson, and this site was actually being contaminated groundwater-wise from a site 2 blocks north. Fortunately, as it turned out, I had done phase ones on 2 properties in that actual area, so I knew what was going on. There was a number of wells that were in the street, groundwater monitoring wells, and Mark was able to get the information on those wells, which kept his client, he's being the broker in the job, kept his client from having to come up with $50,000 every 3 months to test that water, because I was able to show that with the information he found, not me, he found that it was not the seller's responsibility.
Listeners, stay tuned. We've got a lot of additional information that's coming out to you. Really important legislation recently from the 2nd District Court of Appeals. Be sure to catch that podcast. It's concerning notices to your tenants. Pacific West Mortgage Fund is happy to have you, or has it been a pleasure to have you, Steve? And we'll check in with you next time.
Okay.
Thank you very much.